You need to understand that no one management style fits all. In the beginning, I didn't know that. I thought that it could just be me and everyone could, be okay with my style. Some people, and that's something that I'm actually asking the team. How do you like to communicate? How do you like to receive feedback? What works for you? When should I be stepping in? I want to understand them. How do they operate and react and work? And then you adjust your style. That takes work with yourself. Like as a manager, you need to work with yourself, your bias. How do you tend to solve problem? You need to understand your own mindset because subconsciously or consciously, that's what you're going to be expecting from your team.
Ciao, io sono Marco Imperato e questo è il podcast di Product Heroes. Product Heroes è il punto di riferimento in Italia per il product management. Finora abbiamo aiutato oltre 180.000 persone tramite master, formazione in azienda, masterclass, guide, articoli e meetup che svolgiamo ogni mese in diverse città d'Italia. Lo facciamo anche attraverso questo podcast in cui faccio due chiacchiere con product leader che spaccano e che lavorano nelle migliori aziende al mondo. Io sono sicuro che ascoltare le loro storie migliorerà il tuo modo di costruire, lanciare e muovere le metriche del tuo prodotto. In questo episodio sono con un ospite davvero eccezionale. Lei è Maria Arnaoutaki, è originaria di Atene ma adesso vive a Londra ed è Group PM in Spotify, dove guida i product team e la strategia della piattaforma per fare in modo che i contenuti raggiungano gli utenti di Spotify. Sì, perché esiste anche questo mondo sommerso che noi non vediamo. Precedentemente ha lavorato sulla metadata platform di TripAdvisor ed è stata anche nel founding team di una startup in Grecia che si occupava di cure per i bambini. Il suo background è in tech education e in data science. Con Maria parliamo del suo percorso e di ciò che significa passare da IC, ovvero individual contributor, a manager di altri product manager. Nel suo caso, Group PM. Quindi parliamo di come gestire team, di come dare feedback e organizzarsi e tante altre cose che per imparare sul campo, ti assicuro, ci si mette tantissimo tempo, errori e un bel po' di porte in faccia. Quindi ti consiglio di rimanere con noi. Inoltre, se vuoi incontrare Maria dal vivo, lei sarà tra gli ospiti e speaker della Product Heroes Conference che facciamo a Milano il 6 ottobre 2023. Per cui, se ancora non sei in lista d'attesa, ti consiglio di iscriverti cliccando sul link in descrizione o cercando su Google Product Heroes Conference. E adesso, buon ascolto. Ciao Maria.
Hi.
Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
And welcome to Product Heroes.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
So I was waiting for this conversation for weeks. So I just want to start. So let's start with your personal story, with your personal journey. Can you tell us a bit about your background? How did you start?
Sure. So my journey into product is not really linear, but I'm sure a lot of people have the same path as well. So my background is actually in education. So I've studied to become a teacher and specifically teach kids how to code. So it was a blend of technology and teaching. And from there, it was the early days of blogging and content creation. So I've started writing about these things, about education and tech and how to teach kids how to code. And I didn't know back then, I was just creating content, but that really led me into an early stage startup that was actually a marketplace for childcare providers in Greece. And that was my first touch with entrepreneurship and the startup life and actually product. I was a very early employee, so I went through the whole entrepreneurial journey and I've learned what product is. Back in the day, it was, again, the early days of the Agile Manifesto. I didn't really know what I was doing. So I discovered at some point that, that is product. That's what it's being called. Oh, I'm a product manager. And I've started studying and reading and actually teaching myself how to code so that I could understand the engineers, all the way from web to how to build an app. The world was really fascinating for me, so I just kept studying and learning. And from there, I realized that I want to join a bigger company and see how product management and product development is happening in larger scale. So from there on, I joined TripAdvisor and I got into the world of product management in a large organization, really, big customer groups. And I started getting as well into the world of backend metadata and developing the expertise around that. It was a big change there because I had to do things differently. But that really taught me how to become a proper product manager. So I kept studying, kept learning. And after that, after a few years, I joined Spotify, where I'm still at. And for the past years, I'm there. I'm also managing product teams and the product strategy. So I kind of developed myself through different roles, again, in a large scale environment.
I'm curious to know, how was your first day at Spotify? I mean, because it's like one of the biggest product manager dreams, working at Spotify, Netflix, companies like that. So how was your very first day?
My very
Do you
first
remember?
day, I do remember that. I felt it was very organized. As a product manager, you would step in and you would have already a community. You would see that product development has been on for years. So it wasn't that you were coming, much like I felt at the startup, that there was no really structure, there was no base. I felt really, really welcomed. And at the same time, though, I felt there was flexibility. Like, I remember that I could have a voice, I could have an opinion about how things could improve. So, although the company is really big, I felt like I could make a change.
Great. And so today we are talking about your switch from individual contributor to manager. And a few years ago, I thought it was the normal path. While I discovered that a lot of people just want to be super specific at something, like the best in the world at something very specific. Could be UX, could be JavaScript, could be whatever. So why did you choose the management path? Which are the reasons behind your choice?
I also had that perception. Because it's not something that you are necessarily being taught that you will do. I kind of discovered it as part of my career path and by observing other managers of product managers, and I thought, okay, I also have that option. What does it mean? What I didn't realize was that it's a completely different job. So I've started asking, getting mentorship, talking to other managers, and I was trying to understand their day to day. How does it differ from a senior IC or from the IC that I was? And I realized it's a completely different job. And you are achieving things through people, through the team. You have to set up the team, understand the dynamics, all of these things. Now, interesting, when I was teaching, there were a lot of similarities to that. So, growing
Okay.
up into the role, I realized that managing a classroom and a set of students has actually a lot of similarities with managing teams. Communication, influencing, how do you convey the message? How do you ensure the different personalities and skills blend together so that they can achieve something together? So I got interested into that. It was a nice challenge. I didn't know the challenges though back in the beginning. So yeah, it came out of personal interest, and also I realized I liked achieving things through other people and teams, and helping people to grow.
You talked about communication. I think communication is one of the most underrated skill, because even when I started, it was super interesting to me, the first trade-off you have to make, like, okay, I can do this thing by myself, I will spend like 1 minute, or I need to train someone who's gonna spend days to do that.
That is exactly the point. You have, even if you know the solution, or you may think you know the solution, but you have to leave room to the team to come up with another creative way that you haven't thought of. You need to step back. And even if you're really sure, it takes that coaching mindset that as an IC, you don't really have the chance to develop that much. Um, to guide people to find the question, define the question and find a solution and be open and not come through this top bottom approach like you have to do this the way I say so. It's taking a step back and asking a lot of questions, being a good listener, which is hard, and just take the information and develop it with the other person. It's a challenging thing because as an IC, you're so used to come up with solutions very quickly. You need to jump in and it's all on you. So it's a very different mindset to step back and judge. When do I have to step in? There is also the other side. If you are really zoomed out, that's also not a good thing. You need to support the team. You need to feel like the team needs to feel that you're there to provide the direction, but not too much on the weeds. So that zooming in and zooming out, it's another skill that I also had to develop and I'm still developing.
So the question is, how do you balance that? Because what I feel is that when someone on your team comes to you to ask you something, and then I discover the power of questions. Okay, so instead of giving an answer, it's just asking. So, but how do you balance this? It's very interesting, zooming out and zooming in. But to me, or to all the people I met that are becoming right now like managers, it's super hard to balance this part. How do you do that? Do you have any advice for someone who's starting right now?
Yeah, so there are actually a lot of resources out there on how to develop the coaching mindset, which rely a lot on the questions. And you can use different frameworks. What I usually do is ask them whether we have the same understanding of the problem. So just to make sure that I understand, is this the problem you're describing? Really ask again and again. Oftentimes, people use different words for different things, even within the same company, that may mean something else. What is the problem in terms of impact? Like, what is it that you think is going to happen if we don't solve that? So we get on the same page. Then I'm asking, what do you think the next step is? As opposed to me saying, I think the next step is for you to go and do that. And then the third one is, what do you think will happen if you take this step? With this approach, you're trying to see what the other person has in terms of answer in them already, and just leave space and airtime for them to develop as opposed to you to go. Because maybe you're not right. You're not there day to day with the team. And there's going to be a point that you're not going to have the full information. So you have to help them.
So the next question is about your organization. So Spotify is very famous, or at least was very famous, because a few years ago he published like a paper on tribe squads, all the organization. So everyone went crazy about this methodology. So I'm asking, how have you organized your team? How do you work together, and how many people do you manage?
So, independently of the company, I think it has to do with the maturity of the team, the size of the team, and the business needs. Um, so, at the moment, I'm managing a team of 4 PMs, but they also have their own squads. So, we do have our routines and our structure as a product team because we are essentially overviewing a set of problems, and I'm also driving the strategy for these problems. So we need to come together to set the direction, work together on the product strategy, and just also develop ourselves as a team. I think that's another important thing. So not just coming together every week to check the status of a project, but actually see are the skills of that person being used in the best way right now? Can they help another member of the team with something else? Are we being transparent? Do we share the same knowledge? Oftentimes, especially when you're working with systems that they are dependent on each other, you need to be very transparent about what's happening. In a distributed world and remote, that becomes even harder because you need to put the information there all the time in a concise way. So we do that. We really try to create the space for this kind of information exchange.
Do you work fully remote with your team?
A lot of team members are based remote. So I would say if you have at least one person that's permanently, remote, it sets the tone for the team. So you have some opportunities to meet in person, but you have to come up with routines, documentation, a rhythm, so that they know what's happening, what's coming up
Okay.
next, and follow it. Yeah.
Okay, speaking of organization, do you have any rituals? So do you use any frameworks to get along with your team or to work together?
So we do have our, as I said, our rhythms. So we do have meetings every week where I find them the more structured they are, the better. In a sense that if you have an agenda of items to go over, I think that people come more prepared, and you also it takes some skill to not the conversations get too long, but actually get to the point. So we have the weekly where we go, we check any blockers, we
Okay.
share it. With any meeting, I like to ask the question, is this meeting about communication, information, or connection? Same with my
Mm.
team. I'm trying to create routines. Not all of the three things can happen in a meeting. So if we want connection, maybe we set some bonding time separate, remote. If we want information, we do it in a very structured way, so we minimize the cognitive load. And if we want communication, we set it. We say, okay, for the next 20 minutes, we're going to discuss this. Um, and then we have monthly and quarterly routines, like when do we review our product strategy? When do we review our product roadmap? We set separate time for that so that people
Okay.
have the space.
It's very interesting the framing about information, connection, and communication. Can you tell us more about that? Because it's the very first time I heard about it. So how did you come with this solution? I mean, is it a methodology that you use at Spotify? Like, why though is it your personal approach to management and meetings?
So it's not something that's coming from Spotify per se. I've read it somewhere that I cannot recall because it's been quite some time, but it stuck with me. Definitely not my invention, but it stuck with me because I've realized in the beginning I was trying to do everything, especially after the pandemic. In when you're all in the office, connection might happen in the beginning of the meeting. You're all together. You might say something, spend some water cooler time. Uh, with the pandemic, meetings became a lot more structured. So I've realized we cannot do everything at the same time. We have to separate. And if the meeting is for communication and information, it needs a balance. If it's for information, it cannot be just me going into the meeting and saying, okay, this is my update, second update, third update, because you're not in a natural environment, physical environment, people tend to get silent. It's hard to just dump all the
Yeah.
information. You need interaction. So by defining what this meeting is for, so we're going to do this, this is the update, and then we're going to discuss. It creates a lot more interaction in the meeting because it's easy to just sit back, and not all of the team members are also inclined to just be vocal all the time. We have diversity in the group, for example, which is fine. We have to leave space for all of the people.
Speaking about like individual contribution and management. So when you are an individual contributor, it's very easy to find like joy in your job. You
Mhm.
know, when you find a special solution or when you are very proud of what you have accomplished personally. But as a manager, what is the best thing for you of becoming a manager of product manager or manager, generally speaking?
One is, and it takes time. That's a big difference, is that you get delayed gratification. It's not like as an
Okay.
IC, you see your product in production next week and you get it, you get the feedback. As a manager, it takes a lot of time. So developing people takes time. It requires dedication. But when you see it happening, so when you see the team taking a step further and achieving things, when you see, for example, transparency and trust being established, and problems that you had before are no longer exist because the team's members trust each other, and you see it flowing, that is really really why I'm doing this, and growing people, helping them understand what their goals are, and essentially helping them become product managers with their own unique skill sets. And it's not just one size fits all. And the second is the collective power of the team. I know it sounds a bit cliche, but after a while, if you see what the team can do together, it's really rewarding in that sense.
And which are the worst things? Because from the outside, being a manager is cool, especially when you are young. He's a manager, wow. But when you are actually a manager, is like is a roller coaster. So,
Definitely.
what's your personal point of view on like the dark side of management? So the things that people don't see, but actually you have to deal with every single day or every single week.
You need to understand that no one management style fits all. In the beginning, I didn't know that. I thought that it could just be me and everyone could, be okay with my style. Some people, and that's something that I'm actually asking the team. How do you like to communicate? How do you like to receive feedback? What works for you? When should I be stepping in? I want to understand them. How do they operate and react and work? And then you adjust your style. That takes work with yourself. Like as a manager, you need to work with yourself, your bias. How do you tend to solve problems? You need to understand your own mindset, because subconsciously or consciously, that's what you're going to be expecting from your team. The other thing that I've realized is that the things that I'm naturally good at are the hardest ones to coach. If I'm good at something, and I've learned how to do it, I can trace back how I did it, so I can coach my team easier, because you have to do this and you have to do that. If it's something that you're naturally good at, you kind of expect it to happen naturally, and that may be small things like, I don't know, succinct writing, or be very explicit when you're talking, or using specific frameworks. That all of that, you have to map the skills about yourself, where you're good, where you're not good, and just think, how does this pair with each individual? And that takes time and work, of course. The other thing is establishing trust,
Okay.
especially remote, which is sometimes harder. There are mechanisms to do it, but it takes more time, consistency, and stability, like as a team, and how you work with the routines and everything.
What's an advice for like someone who wanna create trust, establish trust among his peers or among his teams? So how do you build trust?
Um, Again, one, you have to work with yourself a lot to be comfortable to deliver bad news, deliver negative feedback, and just take the responsibility, and just be very stable and concise with what you're saying. Not just when the times are good and we're all celebrating, but also when the times are bad. You need to take your responsibility and be accountable for your decisions, even if you made the mistake. I think sometimes managers feel, especially in the beginning, that they have to get it right all the time, because that's your responsibility. I like this quote: I'm not here to be right, I'm here to get it right. So you won't always be 100% right, and that's okay. But in the beginning, you may feel like you haven't proved yourself enough. So you need to be always there and get the praise. No. Sometimes you'll make mistakes. People will not praise you, or they will praise you just a little bit when things are going extremely well, for example, and not. You have to support the team. You have to be there and take the step back.
Great, great advice. One of the advice I had a few years ago that like struck me because I was always trying to have all the answers. Well, obviously I couldn't. So this guy told me, okay, you don't have to have all the answers. Like otherwise you cannot be a manager. If you know everything about all the specific stuff, you cannot solve it. The other thing was, and I want to hear your feedback about that. It was like I don't remember the exact framing, but it was like you don't have to solve all the problems for your team. Because a few years ago it was like, okay, someone has a problem, go to Marco, go to John, or go, to someone else, because he's gonna fix my problem. But it was creating a very strange and bad culture, because no one was taking ownership about his problem. So I would like to hear from you about like problem solving and how to frame all these conversations.
Oh, 100%. Another question there is this my problem to solve? Is this my team's problem? A lot of times it's not our problem to solve. And we have to say no if it isn't, and either drop it if it's not important or delegate it. And if it's our problem to solve, we may realize that we do not have all the answers. That's okay. And how do we work with the team to come up with collective options? And then we decide together. There are a lot of exercises to do that, but it removes you from the spotlight to come up with something, and you're not leaving room for the team to come up with their own options and solutions. Every time especially in the beginning, that I was coming up with my solution and people were like, oh, she suggested it, so we should do it now, and drop all of the thinking. It wasn't necessarily the right one. I missed the opportunity to ask them something, and just, collectively get their thoughts. And also, it's faster if you have this hive mind of options and you choose together. Then you might reach a point where people do not know how to make a decision. Then again, you help them. What if we make this decision? This is going to be the impact. You provide the thinking and the mental model for them to make decisions. Of course, things are not always ideal. Sometimes you have to step in and just say, we're going to do this because we don't have time. Maybe it's an urgency, maybe it's a priority, and people do not have time to think. Then, of course, you need to trade off and take the ownership, like make a decision and own it, and communicate. That's another thing. Communicate that you're going to make this decision, your rationale, and use your judgment and move. Sometimes that's the other thing, because the information that's being shared in an organization is not always the same level. You want to make sure people understand why you're making a decision and trust that you're going to be for them, even if things do not go right.
Speaking about the one-to-one, I think it's a very amazing tool, very less used. It's misused.
Yep.
Sometimes one-to-one is used just to talk about the job, your work, your daily job. So do you have any advice for someone who is going to run one-to-one for the first time with his team?
For the
How do
first
you
time,
run one-to-one? Yeah, how do you run one-to-one? Do you have any, any
yeah.
recipe?
If I meet with someone for the first time and it's someone in my team that I manage, I go usually through these questions. Like, I want to get to know them. Like, how do you like to receive feedback? How do you communicate? What's your expectation of my support? Just want to hear from them so that we establish these things. How do we going to make sure you have time for your development support? Do you want to have it in this meeting? Like, we talk, what should they expect every week. I keep my one-on-ones weekly. Unless there's an urgency, I keep them. I think we shouldn't be canceling because that's their time. And there's another nice framework that my previous manager was using, and I find it very helpful. It's the 3 thumbs up, 3 thumbs down. So you ask them, tell me 3 things that are going well, either work or life, and 3 things that they're not going well. They may not have 3 things, but I find this as a mechanism to unlock conversations and have visibility into things that do not come up with the agenda. I think that's one problem with the strict agendas. People just tend to focus and you miss this kind of free-flowing conversation that may give you insights. So I use that. Another thing is I encourage them to participate in the agenda. So they come up with their own problems and issues. And I've realized that sometimes it takes time. So silence is okay in the meeting. That's another. You may, take a minute. It's okay. We do not have to consume all of the time. People may need time to think, which again, in a remote environment, because interactions happen so quickly, you feel like, oh, it's awkward. So it's not. You can just be silent
But
for a bit.
how do you manage? It's super interesting. How do you manage silence? Because it's awkward, it's strange. I mean,
It's awkward. Yes, it's awkward, and sometimes it happens in a group setting. Sometimes
okay.
or you may ask them. You finish saying something, you ask them thoughts or questions, and everyone goes silent. So in the beginning, I was very awkward with this, but then sometimes people just they need time to think, so they may come up with something after 30 seconds. It's okay. You balance it, but it's okay to be silent, even with your 101. Yeah, it's
I'm gonna use that. I'm gonna use that because when you ask any thoughts or questions, usually no one asks anything in the first 5 to 10 seconds. So the instinct is to jump in. Okay, so goodbye. Talk to you next Monday.
yeah, exactly.
While waiting 1 minute, like being silent should be super strange even for you at the beginning, very uncomfortable.
Of course, even if you had let's say an emotional conversation or something that it takes time to digest, it's okay to leave it. I've seen some teams taking 1 minute towards the end of the meeting, silent writing in the agenda. What is the next step? What did I learn? What do I need to do? I think that's a nice way to close the meeting, and everyone just leaves with the right mindset. But yeah, in the beginning, I just wanted to fill up all the time, and just talk. Sometimes, yeah, it just takes time to digest, and that's okay. Also, another thing, understanding if it's a 101, understand that people might need more time to think, therefore more space. So if you're a person that tends to just jump in and, share information, you're not allowing the person to express themselves, and people will not. They will just sit back and just consume. You need to give them
information.
Yeah, you need to give them. Another thing, distinguishing opportunity from task. A lot of times you might say, oh, have you thought about this? You're saying it as an opportunity for them to explore. They might take it, I need to go and do this, because it's coming from somewhere else. You need to be explicit that I'm not saying that you have to do this. Let's think about it. And if you think, that it's a good opportunity, go and pursue it. Being explicit about what you have in your mind, it's something that has helped me, because people may take it the other way.
Yeah, the way in which you're framing it is very similar to teaching, is what you said at the beginning. Because it's like you have to drive all the people during their paths that are super different. But my question is, okay, but everything super. But what was your biggest mistake, like your biggest learning during your path?
Two things come to mind. The ability to say no. I had hard time, and no meaning, no, this is not my job to do, or it's not my responsibility, I have to delegate. Instead, I was just taking on a lot of responsibilities, or things that were too much for my plate. So protecting time, which if you don't do for yourself, there's a mistake that you're going to let it happen for your team. You need to be very strict and mindful about how your team's spending their time, but also your time, so that you help them. So saying no, setting boundaries for that. And the second one was dealing with negative feedback, especially when I had to deliver it in cases that I knew, or I wasn't sure whether the reaction was going to be something that I could handle. So being comfortable in delivering feedback in a way that's helpful for the other person, but and sometimes things will not go right. That's another form of boundary. So put the boundary, deliver the feedback, be concise, and just work with the person, and move on. Sometimes I've had a hard time delivering that feedback. I would either dance around or not just provide it as it is. Sometimes you have to do that. After a few times of practice, it became easier, but it's not something that we're used to, especially when you have a good culture in the team and there is trust and transparency. It might feel, strange to deliver and saying something, this is not right, or we shouldn't be doing this. This is why, this is what I'm thinking.
Okay, a lot of questions are rising in my mind, but the first one is, how do you say no? Because everyone says, okay, you have to say no. You have to have the not to do list. How do you say no to all the requests you have, both from your team, stakeholders, users? I mean, yes, prioritization is super important. Why someone is coming to you and asking you, okay, we should do this because it's super important. Okay, how do you say no to that person?
What gave me the confidence to do it is to have a very clear understanding of what the goal is for myself and for the team, and just be very either in the form of some people have even personal OKRs for the quarter. That's what I want to do. That's that my goal is. Is this serving the goal for the team or for myself? And have it documented ideally so that I don't have it in my mind flowing. Yeah.
Great.
It's like a sounding board. This is not what, not in the plan, unless it's an urgency, an emergency.
Great. And which are your advice for someone who's becoming a manager like right now? One thing I read a lot of years ago, that I cannot remember who was super interesting and it sticks with me, is like you have just to do two things for being a manager: set clear goals and reduce ambiguity. What do you think about this, and which are your personal advice based on your experience?
Yeah, definitely clarity and ambiguity are things that you need to make sure that you foster in the team. They're looking for your direction. I'd say understand what the coaching mindset is, how you communicate, how do you convey messages, and just communication in general is very important, because you will need to change your style, you will need to adapt, you will need to deliver news, you will need, like, all of these things take time. The way you do it, even verbally or when you write, very important. The written communication that we didn't really touch, but it's really important, to be able to write clear documents that just convey the information. So asking questions, being a good listener, and providing feedback, either positive or constructive. You need to understand how you're doing this. It's a different job, so you need to take the time to discover what kind of bias do you have from previous managers, from your personality, from the way you communicate, from the way you're used to think, from different cultures in other companies, let's say. What do you carry, so that, because you're influencing the team, whether you want it or not. It's your job. You're gonna influence the team, so you better understand how you're doing this, and also understand what mental models are you using for decision making. Take a step to read how you're going to be making decisions, how you're going to prioritize, and then you have to coach all of these things to your team. At the same time, something that happens a lot is that when people become managers over the years, they start wondering, how do I stay in touch with my craft? So how do I keep evolving as a product person? That's super important. And that's something actually I'm thinking now, because in 5 years from now, the things that we're doing might not be relevant in terms of systems, in terms of the products that we're building. You have to find ways to stay in touch with the business and with the craft. And at that level, you might be working on a product strategy. You need to be informed. You need to develop yourself. You might not, for example, writing code directly, but you need to be in touch with what's happening in the industry. So it's not just the management side.
And how do you do that? How do you find the time, and how do you stay in touch with the craft?
One good thing is, you can do it with your team. So you can use, time. Hey, these are the top 5 AI trends that we see influencing product management. Let's talk about them. So you create space and room with the team. This is a new technology. How we create some hack time? Like, how do you see this affecting our products? That's the team. Give them the opportunity. They also need that. The team needs that. They need to see that you're also moving forward and it's not just stuck with the existing stack and technology. And the other one is personal work, personal reading, and just, growth mindset, educate,
Okay.
keep learning. It's not easy. You have to make time for it. You have to commit, and you have to have a schedule and like a dedication
Yeah.
to it. I'm not saying it's happening, overnight.
So basically, the single question, you have to study a lot to
You
read
have
and to
to.
study, to practice. Yeah.
Yeah.
You have to love it. Otherwise, you won't do it. And what do you think about OKRs? Do you use this framework? Do you use it entirely or not?
Yeah, yes. So I've used it in a lot of instances. I see some teams using a version of it. I would say it depends on the team, on the company, and just my personal thought is that take a framework, use it for a bit. Don't just reject it in the month. See how it sticks in a quarter. Same for tools, but also for frameworks. See how you can adjust it. Does it serve the purpose? With OKRs, yeah, it works if you follow the methodology. Some teams I see doing successfully. One problem that I've seen with them is that you may see teams adjusting the confidence, or you're supposed to stretch yourself and just do the 70%. Some
Yeah.
teams, you see them doing like this wave of setting easier goals one quarter, they hit them, then they
Yeah.
switch to harder, then they
Then they
switch to
stretch and then
easier,
they reduce.
because and that's like the semiology of it is like they get affected, like, oh, we didn't hit it. So it's a very like powerful message that we didn't hit it, did we? Like, you need to coach them to go back to the impact. And the other thing is that sometimes teams conflate OKRs with KPIs. You might not be able to hit the KPI in a quarter. That's not the point. The point is to move the needle a little bit. How much do you move it? What was the impact, and measure it? It requires a very data driven approach as well. You need to really know. So, yeah, it depends. I would definitely give it a try and see how it fits.
Okay. But if you have to explain to someone the difference between KPIs and OKRs, because we do a lot of training with OKRs to companies, but they got confused. So they start to like rambling about the KPIs, just numbers to hit. But
Mm.
what's the main difference in your opinion?
I mean, let's say that you want to increase sales by 9%, and that's a KPI for your company. You might have a team that's working on a very specific thing, and they have a quarter. They're not going to be able to move the target 9% for the whole company in a quarter. That's a KPI you're looking towards. You might be able to move 2% for your own feature, for your own product, um, and that contributes to it. So it's how much you're moving the needle on your end. And the other thing is that a lot of times teams do not have the time. Like, they ship something to production and they're waiting. The 9% is not going to come on Monday. It may come three months after that.
Yeah.
So you have to keep working towards it and keep the KPI measurement separate, because you might have, other sales team, the marketing team, like everyone might be working towards that. So
If you had to have one single advice to someone who's gonna start as a PM, want to become a PM, like think about yourself a few years ago, you had to start. Which is the single advice you would have liked to receive?
I would say, if that person is within a company or a role, look for a problem that is interested to you, whether that's it's something that you're familiar with in an industry or your company, and try to come up with a solution or try to build something towards it. It might be a doc, a slide deck. It doesn't have to be code necessarily, but get into the mindset of how would I solve this, This has helped me understand the product life cycle. I didn't know in the beginning what was that, but it's like the idea, from idea to shipping. There are a lot of different steps. Start understanding what those steps are. In the beginning, I was just writing product opportunity docs. Like I see this problem. What's my problem? And there are a lot of resources out there how to write a product opportunity doc. What's the idea? What's the problem? Who am I targeting? Like they need to understand, because essentially product management is product execution, product strategy, influencing, and customer insights. So by going through the product life cycle, you start that understanding that you have some opinions. How do I use data to confirm those? Start building towards that. And if you hit a point that you're not comfortable that the solution is the right one, that's a good point, because you have to dig further.
Okay, well, an advice for someone who's already a PM and you want to improve, to get better.
Early stage, more senior.
Yeah, early stage. It's like exactly in the phase we were talking about. Like you're being like PM. You are a product manager for 2-3 years, then you wanna get further.
So I think communication is important. It's an area that I often see. It sounds very vague, but I'm talking about written communication. How do you write concise, even for product opportunity docs, let's say, how do you write, collect feedback, and make product decisions based on that? That is a skill that you may not just get it as a solution from above. You have to think about it. So communication, which also touches influencing. So I think it's really hard to say how do you become better at influencing, but you need to learn how to communicate effectively. You might think that you do is good to ask for feedback from your peers and understand how am I doing with communication, and they may guide you. An exercise that I run and I find it useful is you during a one-on-one you do the 2x2s. So the person gives 2 pieces of feedback for themselves and 2 for you, and you do the same for yourself and for them, and then you exchange. You can specify that to communication. Let's say, how can I improve my communication skills? And you do that as a manager, so you don't do just for them, and then you exchange. And sometimes it's interesting to see your bias and what the other person thinks.
Yeah, it's super interesting to discover things that you think you are very good at, while actually, it happened to me, you are super bad, while you think that you are the best one.
Yeah, asking for feedback as a manager as well constantly is very important as well.
Thank you very much, Maria. The interview was amazing, and thanks again for your time.
Of course. Thanks for having me. Really enjoyed that.
And obviously, see you in Milan in October.
See you there. Thank you so much.
Ciao.
Ciao.
Grazie per aver ascoltato questo episodio di Product Heroes. Se l'hai trovato utile, iscriviti su YouTube, Spotify, Apple, Amazon, insomma, dove ascolti i tuoi podcast normalmente, così non ti perderai neanche un episodio. Prima di andare via, vota con 5 stelline questo podcast o scrivi un commento o una recensione. Questo ci aiuterà a raggiungere sempre più persone e quindi aumentare la diffusione della cultura di prodotto in Italia, che poi è la nostra mission finale. Quindi il podcast è soltanto uno dei tanti modi che Product Heroes utilizza per spingere la cultura di prodotti. Trovi maggiori informazioni e tutte le attività che svolgiamo su productheroes.it e soprattutto non perderti l'appuntamento più importante che stiamo spingendo negli ultimi mesi, che è la Product Heroes Conference, che sarà a Milano il 6 ottobre 2023. Anche su questo trovi tutte le info su productheroes.it. Ciao e alla prossima!